Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this is the fourth day of our summit. We will discuss on techno policy, and we have our world famous speakers from around the world. We have Mr. Istekhar Pathan from India. He is World Business Angel Investment Forum Turkey Senators. We have Mr. Donald Owens, Chairman HNO International USA. Uh, uh, we have Adam James. He is fellow for World Talent Economy Forum. We have Asante. He is also researcher, School of Information Studies. Uh, we have Mr. Edward Hazin. He's also a policy. He's also policymakers and one of the great scholars. Mr. David Schumacher. He is from Transhumanist Party. Mr. Daniel. He is serial entrepreneur from USA. And Mark Lee. He is CEO of Lee Entertainment. So yes, we have people from academy, we have people from industry, and we have people from like media. So hopefully today's session will be very helpful for our audience. Especially, we are working with Rwanda, especially Collated Lab. We are collaborating with them. We don't do not only arranging this kind of dialogue. We will train 600 entrepreneurs in Rwanda. We will help them to develop policy. So all of our speakers, those who joined today, they have chance to support our projects because all of them are part of our World Talent Economy Forum. So first, I want to give chance Mr. David Schumacher from Transhumanist Party. Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher.
Yes, good morning, Sharif. I have a few slides here. Let me see if I can bring them up. Okay. Pardon me while I get this to go. Well, I'm having some issue getting my slides up here, Sharif. Sorry about that. I don't know why.
You can share with this share option. You get the share
Yes,
option?
it says they're blocked for some reason. I'm not sure why that is.
I don't know.
Well, this is annoying. I guess I can talk through them, but I did make some slides for this.
Okay.
Well, okay, we'll sort this out another time. I apologize. But the slides were great, I promise.
I know they were.
All right, so Sharif introduced me. I'm David Shoemaker from the Transhumanist Party. I self-identify as a technologist, a futurist, yes, a transhumanist, a cryonicist, and even an ENFJ from Myers-Briggs. So that gives you a little bit of my idea where I come from. I do serve also as the chairman of the Arizona Transhumanist Party, the state that I live in here in the United States. I want to say that transhumanism is a diverse community, a lot of different viewpoints with a main core. And today my talk is from my particular point of view. What I hope for those of you that are listening that will take from this is take what I present today and make it your own. Take what's beneficial, leave out what's not, and then adapt this for your area, specifically for Africa that we're talking about today. So for those of you that are not acquainted, what is transhumanism? In a few words, transhumanism is enhancing the human condition through sophisticated technologies. I have on a slide that you can't see, I have a great Wikipedia definition that's more inclusive. And by the way, I will take and make available to Sharif all the references that I have from the slides at the end of this, and perhaps he can put that out there for people to see. So the Wikipedia definition is a good definition. However, as I said, it's very generalized. And there are many subsections, many different groups within the transhumanism movement. And each of those puts their own particular additions and focus onto what being transhumanism is about. Two examples that I have are the Christian Transhumanist Association and the French Transhumanist Association. Just to give you an idea, there are many. So let's talk about my particular point of view, and that is from the United States Transhumanist Party and Arizona Transhumanist Party, which is a local subset of that. So you hear Transhumanist Party and politics, and I want to say that first and foremost, the Transhumanist Party is focused on policy rather than politics is conventionally defined. We are very much about policy, and those are driven by three core values. The first core value is significant life extension, achieved, yes, through science and technology for many, many healthy years. The second core value is cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed by reason, science, and non-ideological values. In other words, values that we can all agree on, even though we're a very large, diverse group. And the third core value is using science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate existential risks to the human species. That's where we focus. Now, I mentioned that I'm director of applied innovation. So what is applied innovation? I define that as using creative thinking, collaboration, commitment, and behavior to change theory from practice. This is by using that formula, by paying attention to those ideas, you can make policy that produces real and lasting change. So one more thing I want to introduce before we talk about some ideas on policy is something called the proactionary principle. This is something that's well observed and well accepted in the transhumanist community. And in a few words, it is weighing the cost of implementing a technology against, yes, the hidden costs of not weighing it. Now, that may sound reasonable, but it's not generally practiced. Many times there is so much precaution in adapting to a new technology that there is pain, suffering, and opportunity loss that may not be realized until much later down the road. So transhumanism, applying innovation, and the proactionary principle are the pillars of how I would like to approach policy. So I mentioned the state of Arizona. That's where I'm from. And so this is a United States example specifically to Arizona, but can be more generalized about how transhumanism can be applied to policy. In Arizona, we're a desert state for the most part. And the central part of Arizona where I live, which is the most populated part, we receive our water from the Colorado River system, as do some other states. Arizona was one of the states that was last to be incorporated into this arrangement and the first to receive water cutbacks should the Colorado River ever reduce the amount of water that's flowing. And with whatever's going on in the world, however you interpret that, that is a reality in Arizona today, that we have less water to use than we did before. So I'll put up a reference later, but I would want to point you to Section 10 of the United States Transhumanist Party platform. And it talks about construction of self-repairing, self-maintaining, smart infrastructure for, in this case, clean, potable water that can be distributed everywhere. So that's using technology in the right, with the right focus to get an outcome that's good for everyone. And this is what I advocate for. One of the things that I advocate for here in the state of Arizona. On a broader scale, there's an Ohio State University paper that talks about using desalinization, improvements in agricultural technology, example, precision watering and monitoring. So the conversation is not just happening in transhumanism. This conversation is happening in Arizona and across the United States. Now let's move on to some possible Africa policies. First, I want to point out that last month in Cameroon, there was a conference, the 15th of the 17th of November, talking about how transhumanism can help Africa as it moves forward into the 21st century. And the focus was primarily on Africa joining the fourth industrial revolution and how that is possible. I'll also provide a reference from our ambassador for Togo, who attended, and his take on that. But what he took away from that in just a few words is that transhumanism was as a form of promotion or governance of technologies represents an opportunity to accelerate technological development in Africa. One of the references that I'll leave you with is a YouTube video that was made just before the conference, talking to the principal speakers, that if you speak French, you can listen to. The YouTube video is in French, and you can interpret some of you can use Google Translate if you don't speak French to interpret from the summary that's listed in YouTube. So the conversation's not just happening in the United States and Arizona. This conversation's happening in Africa, and for that matter, it's happening all over the world. One other thing I'd like to point out for Africa is Brookings Institution has produced the Foresight Africa 2020 report. Chapter 5 of that report, and once again, there'll be a link for this if you want to download and take a look at that and read that, talks about how Africa can join and should join the fourth industrial revolution. And these are, in most parts, transhumanist technologies that we're talking about, ways to help provide policy to reduce poverty, to make financial investment available to a larger group. Once again, also agricultural and agro industries, back to crop watering, precision monitoring, using Internet of Things, for example. And then a huge area has to do with healthcare and some specific ideas on the improvement of healthcare, especially in more rural places in Africa. So there's a lot going on, the conversation's going on, and transhumanism is one that's driving that forward. So in closing, what I want to leave you with is science, technology, applied innovation, proactionary policy. This is the transhumanist mindset. It's innovative, and it's looking for the best solutions for the most people. And that's what sound policy really is. Thank you, Sharif. I'll post those references here in just a second.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher. If from our speakers, if you have any questions to Mr. David Schumacher, you can ask.
Well, good. I'm getting off easy.
Well, the thing is, I agree with everything you say. So what can I say?
Thank you, Edward.
David, I'd just like to know if what's going on in India as far as transhumanism is concerned. You have a presence here, and is someone doing it?
Well, I don't know generally, but specifically, I was just asked to speak to a number of academics in India on the idea of transhumanism. And I don't have a specific date or conference name for that yet. We're still in the arrangement period, but I do look forward to working with India.
Good. So I think we should have an offline conversation as well.
Thank you. Thank you. My questions to Mr. David Schumacher, especially we are discussing about techno policy in Africa. So what do you think if we think the industry 4.0 development, like infrastructure development, what is your advice, especially for Africa, like country like Rwanda, especially for Rwanda? I'm sure we have our audience from Rwanda, from Collated Lab.
Well, I'd say that one of the greatest things that you can start to do from a very practical standpoint is enabling digital technology. Cell phones are so widely used. Whatever we can do, and I say we, it's all of us trying to make this happen wherever we can, make those cell phones really useful. Wi-Fi access, telephone, internet access, making those solid, making the electricity grid in those areas solid. That is one of the things, because it allows then people to have access to things they never had before. For example, banking can be a real problem, obviously. But with fintech technologies, once again available through the internet, that opens up whole new areas that were not available before to people that did not have them before. So that's just one example, but I think it's probably one of the best places to start.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher. Now I request Mr. Edward Hudgens from USA.
Hi. Yes, thanks for organizing a really great event here. And I'm Edward Hudgens. I'm with the Human Achievement Alliance. My background is actually public policy. I've worked for places like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, Atlas Society, and others. And I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. So even though I have a PhD in political philosophy, what I do is actually right on the ground. It's not some airy stuff where we talk about abstracts that have nothing to do with humans. We very much deal with humans. And again, I want to say a few things about Africa. First of all, I think that exponential technology really offers an opportunity for Africa especially to skip some of the very costly steps that the West has had to, and the developed world has had to go through. Now, I want to preface this with the noting that when you speak of Africa, as every African knows, it's like speaking of Asia or Europe. It's not one thing. And so it's really not accurate to say, well, all Africans should do X, Y, and Z. You can't do that because it's such a varied region, just like the United States is a varied region and Asia is a varied region and so forth. So everything I say, please, people are going to have to apply it locally. Okay. And that's one of my messages is to exponential technology allows for local applications and local innovations. One size fits all approaches to public policy tend not to work. What might be a really good policy, for example, to bring connectivity to Lagos, Nigeria, or to Johannesburg, South Africa, or to Nairobi, or wherever, might not work in a rural area. There might be you might need Elon Musk's Starlink might be better than, say, laying down fiber optics. So that's the first thing, is to note that you're going to have to apply the technology, the exponential technology, to specific areas and regions. And Africans, just like Asians and Americans and so forth, need to allow for the freedom to do that rather than to try to fit a square peg in a round hole, the way we like to say here in the United States. The second point is indeed that exponential technology not only allows for quicker advances, it allows African countries to skip some of the very costly steps that we've had to go through here in the West. For example, education is with the sort of thing that David has talked about, connectivity. 15 years ago, nobody had a smartphone. Today, 87% of Americans have smartphones. We are almost totally connected in this country, and people have access, even the poorest person in the United States have access to the internet through computers. They can go to their library if they don't have one in their house. And of course, the challenge is even greater in places like Africa. I know something about India. I've worked with some policy folks there, and I know that, again, it's a very varied area. So there's going to be a lot of challenges, but that's very important because that sort of connectivity is going to allow for innovation in education. Education is the most important thing, by the way, because the human being is the ultimate resource. It's not something in the ground. It's not something that grows out of the ground, because we're the ones who decide and determine how something coming out of the ground is going to be an asset. 150 years ago, if we had oil coming out of the ground in Texas, if you had oil on your land, it was worthless land because you couldn't grow crops there. It took a human being to figure out how to take that oil and make it into an asset. Steve Jobs famously said that, what he wanted to do was take sand and make it into technology, silicon. So it takes human beings to do that. Education is the most important thing in Africa and frankly everywhere. You can skip healthcare steps. For example, instead of building tens of thousands of brick and mortar hospitals, which are costly, they're wasteful because often the machines aren't used at the, to the maximum. You can do things with wearable technology. You can do things with wearable diagnostics, with connections to diagnostic centers. There's lots of things you can do, and would be really a good fit if African policymakers can sort of skip some of the steps that we've done here. Sanitation, energy generation, and things like that are another area where exponential technology can really be useful, where you can skip steps instead of building, for example, a huge plant, to generate electricity. You can do it in a more localized level. But the thing I want to end with, and this is really the key, is that it takes human beings to do this. I'm not sure if I can do a screen share here or not. Well, let me see. Okay, it doesn't. Let me see. Share screen. Okay, I'm going to go to a different screen here to show you if I can. Here we go. When I don't know, can you see this share screen right now? Not sure if anyone can see. Anyway.
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Well, anyway. Okay. It doesn't look like that's going to work. We have some technological issues here, even though we're talking about the wonders of technology. I developed the idea when I was working in another organization of an index of economic freedom. And my first sample piece was to look at why Asia grows and Africa doesn't. And what I did, let's see if I can bring up my this again. Anyway, what I did was I looked at the Africa from 1965 to 1985. I did this report in 1990, and I wanted to see what Africa would look like if it had grown at the rate of the so-called four Asian tigers: South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And all of them started out kind of at the same place. They were very poor, war ravaged in the case of the Asian countries. And what I found was very interesting. In 1965, the total GDP of sub-Saharan Africa minus South Africa was about $121 billion. In 1985, it was $211 billion. So it was about double. However, because of population increase, the per capita income was stagnant at $500. What would Africa had looked like over 20 years if it had grown at the same rate as the four Asian tigers? Instead of Africans having a per capita income of $500, the per capita income would have been $1,841. Instead of GDP of 200 billion, it would have been 648 billion. How was that possible? Well, it was possible because the Asian countries had much greater free markets, and that's the major point there. I took a look at the Index of Economic Freedom, which I developed the ideas for, but other people operationalized it. And in 2019, what you found was this. The index basically rates countries in terms of free, mostly free, moderately free, mostly unfree, and repressed. Of the 47 African countries that were rated, sub-Saharan African countries, only 2 rated as mostly free. Mauritius and Rwanda. And Rwanda has really been outstanding in terms of coming from a very bad place to where they are today. Only 2 were mostly free. 6 were ranked as moderately free. 30 were ranked as mostly unfree. 9 were ranked as repressed. this helps to explain, the lack of liberty helps to explain why the average per capita income of sub-Saharan African countries in 2019 was about $4,000 compared to $66,700 for the sixth freest economies in the world. And the biggest problem in Africa, by the way, was government corruption. Property rights were not protected. I can link you to all of the statistics here. Judicial effectiveness was very bad. Government integrity was very bad. My point is this, that in order to use technology are tools. And there were many, many technological tools in 1965, 75, 85, 95, and so forth. The Asians had a system that allowed them to develop those tools and to use those tools. Most African countries did not. So one of the essential things that African policymakers are going to have to do is to look at the Asian countries. And by the way, not just the Asian countries, because the United States and other countries as well, and basically see how well, what policies they had, and then to follow those kinds of policies where they unleash the creativity and the entrepreneurship of people in Africa. I like to say Africans do really, really well. For example, when they come to the United States, a lot of the healthcare workers here in the United States are Africans who come here and are doing an incredible job. But of course, what you want is public policies that keep them in Africa, not because we don't want them here. We love having people from Africa and Asia and everywhere else in the United States. But you need the liberty that can so that people can use the technologies that David has talked about and others will talk about as well, and to apply them locally as well as at a national level. The other thing is this, and I'll end with this. What's most important, what you're doing is not only creating vibrant economies like Rwanda has done, you're creating a cadre, a core of individuals who are futuristic looking, who are innovative, and who see the importance of an open system, that in the future, these will be the leaders who will overcome a lot of the policy problems, a lot of the corruption and so forth in African countries. So I'm involved with a number of groups working in Africa because I see Africa as one of the having great potential and really can be a world leader in the future and help their own people. Just as, by the way, we see, look at what happened in Malaysia. What a great example. That's a whole different show, Sharif, that we'll get into later, I'm sure. But anyway, Sharif, thanks for another great conference, and I applaud everybody. Everybody should be supporting the World Talent Economic Forum.
Thank you, Professor Edward, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. From my side, there is one specific question, because last 3 days we have conference with different government officials as well as different academic person in Rwanda. So can you guide them specifically for healthcare policy development, how they can develop, because you are expert of policy development?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most important areas. And of course, one of the first things I would do is look at the essentials. Things like sanitation, for example, is really crucial. A lot of these basic things that we in the more developed countries got centuries ago, literally, that should be an area of focus. Also, be innovative about it. For example, Bill Gates, who of course is the co-founder of Microsoft and helped create the computer revolution, his foundation has been doing a lot of very interesting work in Africa with sanitation. And the thing is, for many, many decades, African countries have tried to build either huge facilities that are very costly but don't really serve the people correctly, as opposed to allowing for more local solutions. What his foundation is doing is looking at more localized solutions with technology. So what I'd say is that if you're a policymaker in Africa, we like to say, think outside of the box. In other words, look at all the different alternatives and for healthcare. I've mentioned, for example, wearable technologies. I could talk about some of the technologies. There's a thing called a lab on a chip, which is where you take a little blood sample and you have a sort of very basic technology that can evaluate the blood sample, send the information to a remote location for diagnostics, and then perhaps say, okay, here's the treatment that is needed, which cuts out a whole lot of the cost of, say, building a huge local facility. You can have smaller facilities. And again, I'm happy to to advise anybody, any policymakers who are listening to me today on these issues, because we're going through exactly the same thing here in the United States. We have an incredibly bad system in this country. We have the most advanced technology. The things we can do today are incredible, but the institutional framework just does not work in the United States. And I could do a whole show on that. I've written papers on that. So please, anyone who's interested, you're welcome to contact me as Sharif. I'm sure you'll communicate our contact information.
Thank you.
The audience.
There is a specific question from Mr. James. Thanks, Dr. Edward. Can you please stress like example of tech tools that can be considered during public policy development, specifically for Africa or Rwanda?
Tech rules, you said?
Yes. Tech
Well, I mean,
tools.
oh, tech tools. Oh, yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, I mentioned, for example, diagnostic tools, which, I'm advocating doing more of that in the United States. In other words, where instead of having to have a huge facility, let's say in a rural area or, maybe a small village area or small town area, you can basically have some of the new diagnostic tools, healthcare diagnostic tools, that you can do an evaluation. You can send the information to a remote location, more centralized location that can do the evaluation for a patient and then send back the information. I would also say sanitation. Again, I mentioned some of the technologies that Bill Gates's foundation is developing. They're actually developing. This might not be a nice thing to mention, say during breakfast time for some of the people who are listening to us today, but he's developing a toilet that basically is very sanitary. It's very sort of portable. It's something that you can deal with, and it recycles the waste. And for example, one of the problems in some of the rural areas, especially, is that what happens to the waste? Where does it go? And is there a less costly way of disposing of it, or even recycling it? You can recycle waste to use, for example, as fertilizer. And again, sanitation is a very fundamental healthcare issue. So again, these are tools, and this is why it takes entrepreneurs to figure out how to use the tools. Apple created a wonderful device here. Well, they have a lot of wonderful devices, but this is just a piece of metal with a bunch of like circuits in it. It's only when a human being figures out how to use it and how to do something with it, like what Sharif is doing right now with this conference, that it becomes that it's a value. So again, I'm happy to talk to people offline about this, because I could go into more detail. I've got a paper I'm working on right now, in fact, on just this issue, how to integrate the exponential healthcare tools into a new policy paradigm that will actually take our current sick care system, a system in which you get sick and then everybody debates who should pay the bills, into a real healthcare system where you head off the illnesses to begin with. And Africa is in an interesting position because they don't have to adopt some of the failed approaches in the West. They can basically go straight to some of the better approaches in the long term.
Thank you, Professor Edward, for your excellent questions. Mr. Markley, I just want to share one point because this World Toilet Organizations, the founder is Mr. Jackson from Singapore. Yes, World Toilet Organization. We are closely World Talent Economy Forum with Mr. Jackson. Even he's my friend. We are working with him, and this is very, very important. He's doing very interesting work right now. Even I think recently he presented some innovative things with Oxford University, I believe. Yeah, they are also we are closely working with Mr. Jackson. So thank you, Professor Edward. I think you have another question from Mr. Markley.
No, I just wanted to make a clarification to our brothers and sisters from the African nations and everything. And it was actually referencing to something that Edward talked about and along those lines, because I don't want folks to get the idea that everybody in America has a internet and has computers all over the place, because even here we have some issues as well. And I think that Dr. Edward would agree as well, because I know that there are some initiatives even here in the United States to attack our rural and southern areas that do not have the kind of internet access that is available in some of our more urban areas, and there is a digital divide that exists in our rural areas. A lot of these rural areas are also heavily African American populated and things of that nature, but I don't want you to think that it's just strictly African American populations that are being struck down by that kind of problem. But just didn't want to make that clarification, because in Edward's remarks, he was saying that there was definitely a lot of internet access, and there is, and I'm not denying that, but in the rural areas, that is not as much of a given, I guess is the word that I would use, because even here in North Carolina, where I'm based at, there is a rural broadband initiative to try to get more internet access into like the mountains and some of the other parts that are very rural. So I just wanted to clarify that, and if Edward disagrees with me, he can let me know.
No. I guess it's an issue of whether the glass is half empty or half full. And what's interesting about technology, and you can look at this from a historical perspective, is the integration of new technologies, exponential technologies, has been very, very fast compared to the past. For example, if you take a look at how long did it take for 50% of Americans, let's take just the United States, to have telephones. And you look and you see it takes many, many, many decades, or 50% of Americans to have, certain electricity and so forth and so on. What you see is the adoption of these technologies has gone much, much, much faster. Again, I mentioned going from 0 people having smartphones to 87% of American adults having smartphones. Yes, there's still 12% or 13% that don't have smartphones, but this is absolutely outstanding. You're absolutely right, by the way, about, there are places that don't have it, but compared to 30 or 40 years ago, nobody had it. I would mention, by the way, this is where entrepreneurship comes in. I'm very keen to see what happens with Elon Musk's Starlink, because putting fiber optic cables in, which is the best kind of connectivity, is incredibly expensive. Wi-Fi towers are much less expensive. Right now, I'm on a Wi-Fi tower, and we'll see what happens with Elon Musk's Starlink. That could be basically the answer for rural areas, not only in the United States, by the way, but elsewhere. Because he's an innovator, he's come up with some cool ideas, and he's going to give it a shot. So, I certainly agree. I want to see 100% connectivity, and I want to see 100% healthcare, but I want to see the people like Musk and Gates and so forth leading the way. So, but yes, hopefully we'll all have better connections for our next meeting.
Yeah, hopefully we'll definitely have better connections. That just to clarify and everything really quickly. The last research said that the last research said that 22%
we have many
African
speakers.
Americans have no internet at home. But then I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Actually, we have many speakers. We have to give them chance. Even Mr. Martley, you will get 10 minutes for your speech. Now I request Mr. Iftekhar Pathan.
Yeah, thank you, Sharif and Collated Lab, for this opportunity. So what I've done, gentlemen, is just the India perspective. So instead of saying what Rwanda or the Africans should do, I've just made some notes on what India has done so far. So a little flashback. Actually, technology is not new to us. As you all know, Indus Valley civilization was, I think it was evident then, the way they were doing town planning, the drainage systems, road planning, etc. It was something which people still talk about, and some exemplary work done then. So it was sort of a DNA. The Indians had this in them, that they've been developing technology since very long. So it's like a ancient phenomenon for us. The next slide, please. So what happened is just after independence, when the British left, the then government thought that they should have a 5-year planning. And in a broader sense, they worked on science and technology. And they wanted that to become one of the major focus areas with a lot of emphasis on it. As you know, the first Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, he said that we should give lot of emphasis on education. I think you mentioned, Edward just mentioned that education is extremely important as a base, and that's exactly how it all began. To give a solid education, which led as a foundation, basic foundation for science and technology. Yes, sir. So just going through the research and a couple of talks that I had given earlier, you will be surprised that when the British left India, the literacy rate in India was 16%, out of which 18.9% females, and only 1 out of 11 women could write. Student population was 4 lakh. Number of universities were only 24, and number of colleges was 700 approximately. But today, as we speak, I'm very proud to say that the literacy rate is about 74%. Student population is 20 million. We have over 35,000 colleges, 600 universities, and 2,000 research and development institutes, and 400,000 science professionals. So that has been a paradigm shift or a game changer that was initially led by Prime Minister Nehru, which has resulted in giving us this great foundation of the education sector. Yes, sir. So this is how it began. So first policy that we had was in 1958. So it emphasized on basic research because they said that every sector in the country needed research basically in the field of science. And then for that, we needed to develop a sort of a infrastructure because no infrastructure those days were available. Then 1983, we wanted to create, technological competence and self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, which we called and which we still live by in the current dispensation. So that was the beginning was 1958, then it was 1983 with different focuses. Sharif. And then the buzzword in 2003 is science and technology and innovation for people. So innovation then came as an important aspect of the entire policy in 2003. And we focused on the investment that is required for research and development. That was one. And to create a national innovation system. So what you see there is the science and technology innovation policy came about in 2013 as a result of the thinking that was done in 2003. So that's how the graduations happened as far as technology is concerned. And then there were a lot of schemes introduced which will make innovation as there. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a 5-year plan. So one of the 5-year plans between 2012 and 17 focused basically on creating science and technology and mostly emphasized on partnership growth of science and technology. Over the recent past, India has declared the 2010 to 2020 as the decade of innovation, a lot of emphasis on that. And DST has now put the fifth draft policy of public opinion and consultation. And the major difference between all the policies before and the policy now is that it is not top down, but bottom up. So people are at the center of this policy, which is now been put out in the public domain as being reviewed and will be soon, conceptualized and finalized. Yes, sir. The National Council, what happened as along with the education, building policies, getting innovation at the forefront, building the infrastructure, there was a need to create a narrative of science and technology in India. And that's why there was a promulgation and propagation through the National Council for Science and Technology Communication. So they went around the whole country emphasizing the importance of science and technology, because advertising that and taking the message to the people at large is extremely important. So that was done through NCS TCPs. Yeah, sir. So there is one of these most audacious project that we did, I think, in India is that the setting up of the software technology parks of India. It was in 1991, and I think it has been one of the game changers for us. In this, what you can the I mean, in Pune, where I live, in my city, also we have a software technology park. And from starting from 52 crores in 1992 to 93, we went to 4,92,000 crores in 2021, which is approximately 50% of the national software exports and 2.3% of India's GDP. So that is what I think. In succinctly, India has moved from thinking about it to delivering the policy and the positive results from that. So thank you, gentlemen. That's what I had. I just wanted to give you a sneak peek into what India basically started off with and what it has been able to achieve. And we can all, any questions, I'm happy to solve.
Excellent, Mr. Istekar. I'm sure that our audience also like this presentation, especially Mr. Jason. He already responds to it. I love history lessons because he's from USA. So I have a specific question because yes, we are representing developing nations. What do you think? Like developing nations, when they develop their own policy, uh, they should depend on different country like developed nations, or they have to develop their own policy by their own expert.
Yeah, so see, Sharif, what I think, I'm not a policy expert, but whatever little experience I have in working in different geographies, if you personify any nation, and if you look at maybe the Africa or Indian, we have our own idiosyncrasies. We are very unique and we are very different. And there are some things which are common. So if you want to come out of the situation like Rwanda, if it wants to come out of the situation, I think the focus on literacy, I will always emphasize that it has to be there. There has to be infrastructure, and it has to be an environment that is conducive for entrepreneurs to sort of, the red tapeism has to be down, getting permissions and getting the infrastructure from the government side has to be done very, very easily, like we are doing in India now. Ease of business that we are talking about has to be a part of that. And to build good policies, you need intellectuals. You can definitely learn from different countries, but when it comes to your own country, you have your own unique problems, depending on the population, depending on the demographics, depending on the education system, and so on and so forth. So what, to answer your question, yes, you have to learn from everybody else, but you need to decide what you need for your own self. And most important in that is the education and the free will, in the sense, openness for the entrepreneurs to those. You look at the example in Singapore, it's not the government but the entrepreneurs who made a difference. You mentioned Jack Sim. So I and Dr. Nikhil Agarwal and Jack, we were all together in the World Entrepreneurship Forum in France. So we worked very closely. And that's why I give this example, that if you look at Singapore, the entrepreneurs and innovation has changed the nation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Iftekhar. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Now I request Professor Dr. Nikhil Agarwal from IIT Kanpur.
Thank you, Sharif. Acknowledgement to all my friends joining from across the world, especially my colleague and friend Iftikhar Pathan from Pune. The topic today is about technology policy in Africa. So let me give you some examples from India, Africa, that how technology can play a vital role while shaping up the policy. It's been almost 2 years since the COVID has hit us. There are various waves of COVID which has come under the play, which is somewhere it is called wave 1, wave 2, wave 3. In India, we have seen few waves. Now there is a new variant of called Omicron, which has come, originated or detected. I would not call it originated, but detected in South Africa for the first time. How the technological understanding has shaped up the policy. That's the best example which is going on today. So certainly the virus is not originated from Africa, we all know about it. It's not originated from South Africa. We know about it. It originated somewhere in China. That's what the basic belief is, and it spread around the world. And that's how the travel policies and even the trade policies were decided on the basis of the origination of the virus. Now the new constraint, a new variant which has come from which is detected in South Africa. There is a the travel policy which has been decided on the base of the origination. That's a significant inclination towards African nation rather than having towards the European nation. And recently, I was on a debate where discussing about that why we have discrimination uh, between them. So the policy, the travel policy, is decided on the detection of the virus, and certainly not the origination of the virus. So there's a huge implication. Anything which is related to the health and travel, now there is an interrelation. Second example comes into the play about the certain protest at the ground level protest, like India being a democratic country, US being a democratic country, and we have seen Africa also many countries are still democratic, has seen various kind of protests which comes on, and on the basis of the social issues when the protest happens, the policy of the government takes shapes. Now, just to give you an example from US, there was sit-down protest which is called the lockdown Wall Street, and there was like for almost a year or two, the people were sitting on the Wall Street and were like sitting around. So the basis on the certain policies which was made by the corporate America, the American politics has taken shape. Now the new policies which you see are the resultant of that protest which has happened at that point of time. SOPA, PIPA, these kind of act has shaped up the policy. The internet governance has shaped the policy. Now technology is playing every role in shaping of the policy of the government. From the health side, from the education side, from the hardcore information technology side. Now there is a discussion about the cryptocurrency. There's a discussion about the fake news, because fake news and the alerts which is coming in is changing our way we see the big tech. The Facebook has changed its structure. They come from Facebook to metaverse. And I was just speaking to, like few hours back, I was speaking to a very senior executive from Facebook, and he told me the way the Facebook is shaping up, the metaverse is shaping up. There will be metaverse currency. There is a metaverse, the parallel universe that they are changing. You can buy things in meta currency. So they are creating a parallel economy in metaverse. It will be bigger than the most of the countries, because today, if you look at just on the Facebook ecosystem, which is Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and related technologies, the close to 2.5 billion people are there, which is bigger than if you put India, US, Brazil, Russia population all put together. It is bigger than that. So such a huge population will come and do economic transaction on a parallel universe. Now, how do you regulate that? How do you collect taxes on the meta currency? How do you charge the income tax on the income of the meta currency? These are the policy issues that will shape up. So technology policy is directly any technological changes that happens related to policy, and particularly the focal point is Africa because of the virus restrictions which is coming in. There is a huge implication that is coming in, and I am speaking to my African friends. There are a few here in the show. They will share with you, because of the travel restrictions, the economic restriction which is taking shape. It is hurting the economy. So we have to go out and tell the government that they have to shape up their policy based on the more structured knowledge than the just the origination or the detection of certain viruses. So I'll stop here, and if there is any questions, please let me know.
Yes. I want to take a questions from audience. I think he actually asked these questions based on India because okay, Mr. James, he is actually from Collated Lab. What is the scope of Software Technology Park and its key innovation? I think he want to know more about India software technology park. I think Mr. Pathan actually introduced this park.
Yeah. So,
Software technology park.
Iftikhar, you want to answer this question?
Mr. Nikhil.
Okay. Now I'm asking Iftikhar he won't, because he has introduced
Okay.
this.
Yeah, no, Nikhil, you please feel free to answer. Then I'll add my points as well.
Okay. So the STP, as Mr. Iftikhar has already told you, that STP policy was introduced around 21 years back, where there are certain benefits which was given to the companies who set up their base in any of the STPs. We have, I'm not don't remember the exact numbers, but we have now maybe close to 100 STPs across the country. They provide the high-speed internet, the infrastructure subsidy, the income tax and the export subsidies are provided to the companies. And STP policy has become one of the forefront that why the Indian technology has gained momentum across the world. And as you know, most of you know that today some of the biggest tech companies are headed by the first generation Indian immigrants. The recent addition was the Twitter CEO Parag Agrawal, and we know about Sundar Pichai, Asita Nadella, Arvind Krishnan, who heads Google, Microsoft, and IBM respectively. So certainly the engineering ecosystem as well as the government policy to allow companies to access to cheaper infrastructure, lesser income tax has promoted technology in India. So STP, Software Technology Park, has been quite an important addition to for our growth of the IT companies in India.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So, just a few points. STP, actually, we also have Sharif, also James, who asked in my city where I am. So, the part of the city that used to be basic only farmland, and the farmers who lived there were actually not in a very good economic stage. So, one of the forward thinking politicians decided to set up the STP park there, and that has changed the entire future and generation of those families that the farmers live there and of the next generation. So basically, these are economic zones where you have a lot of shops, like Dr. Nikhil just said, in terms of tax holidays, in terms of export opportunities, in terms of taking them to the rest of the world, and a lot of government policies to support the entrepreneurs who will set up shop in STPs. So from I would say that Pune as a city has now become the fifth fastest growing cities on the list of Forbes, and a lot of credit I will give to the IT and the STP set up in this region. I hope that answers the question. If there is anything else,
Yes.
I'm happy to answer.
Mr. Martley? Yes, Mr.
I
Martley,
was
you
just
want to
going
add
to
any
add
point?
I was just going to add really quickly. One of the top research triangle parks in the country here in the United States is actually based where I'm located at in the Durham area, which is actually the Research Triangle Park. And it was actually created way back in 1959 and uses a lot of our university accesses points in terms of both North Carolina State, Duke University, and UNC Chapel Hill, as well as our local HBCUs, in order to supply a lot of the people that work in that park. And of course, Glaxo is one of the key it's there, as is Cisco and a number of others, and it covers like about 7,000 acres and is definitely one of the leading ones here in the United States. So anytime that those park ideas come up, they are definitely very well considered a major part of the economic of this region, and there are even some people that are trying to create similar parks in some of the other more rural areas. Like I know there's a park being developed in an area toward Rocky Mount, which is a smaller rural community, and there are some other parks as well. But most people, when they think of these parks, they think of Research Triangle Park, and they think, of course, of Silicon Valley there in California. So definitely, it's one of the top ones, and it's one that a lot of people are being suggested for countries around the world. And I do know that there are some people, even from the Research Triangle Park area and the Research Triangle Park Foundation, that have done some work there in some of the African countries to try to help them create those as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I request for a speech Mr. Donald Owens, Chairman HNO International USA.
Thank you for having me today, Rashif. My name is Donald Owens. I am the chairman of H&O International. And one of the good things about this forum is that I won't have to convince most of you all of how vast the energy infrastructure is that allows all of this technology to be developed. We develop a lot of things as human beings. We do some incredible things. But and I don't want anybody to look at this as a bad word, but we do it because we live in a fossil fuel energy infrastructure.
Right.
And it's very, very, very vast. I live in Southern California, and I know the port of Long Beach is here. And when you drive across the port of Long Beach and you see all of that activity down there and all that energy that's required, that will never be run by solar panels. So we have to recognize the facts that we live in a fossil fuel energy infrastructure, but that infrastructure is causing what most people know of, a lot of scientists know, but most regular human beings don't, is black carbon. Mm-hmm. And black carbon is not one of the reasons why we have climate change. It is the reason why we have climate change. It is because it is coating the glaciers and causing them to melt. And as long as we have melting glaciers, we're going to have some serious problems with climate change. And all the technology that we have, all the advances that we have, because we have human beings and we can do just about anything we want to do, it's going to be all for naught if we don't do something about black carbon. Now, I wouldn't be just talking about black carbon if I didn't have a solution for it, because most people already know that it is indeed a major cause for all the climate issues that we're having. And these climate issues that we're having are not in the future. They are happening right now. So so we have to develop solutions that's going to help us right now. And everything that people are talking about doing, electric cars, that's all great. It's wonderful. The technology is wonderful. But we need a fossil fuel infrastructure just to build it. And if most people don't understand the fossil fuel infrastructure, which we need, and I don't have anything against it. I don't want anybody to think I'm anti-fossil fuel. I was sitting in a hotel in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, and it was 116 degrees outside. Mm-hmm. I was glad I was in that hotel eating ice cream and eating some other food. And I was glad that somebody was out there drilling for oil. Because if somebody wasn't out there producing the fossil fuel that we need, it would have been 116 degrees inside that building. But then I think about all of the rest of the entire world that is also comfortable. And we have our medical advances, we have our universities, we have our everything because of this infrastructure. So we have to recognize that infrastructure is vast, but the infrastructure creates and burns fuel. And whenever we burn fuel, we create black carbon. And whenever we create black carbon, it coats the glaciers. There was a study that came out a couple of days ago that talked about the Antarctic ice and how over the last 4 years, it has increased by 85%. The black carbon on that ice has been increased by 85%. All because of the shipping that's going on. And we're not going to stop shipping. Now, I'm bringing all this up because H&O International has developed by accident a way that we can reduce this black carbon. It's a system that we use to make our fuel burn better. Now, if people want to go to my website, it's hnointernational.com. You can go to my book. I wrote a book about this called Burn Fuel Better. But the whole philosophy of what we're talking about is using and recognizing that our infrastructure is creating our problems, but we can do something about it. It's not that we can't do anything about it. See, and in fact, the name of my book is Burn Fuel Better, from helpless to hopeful in the race against climate change. Now, this climate change race that we're in is serious. It's nothing to take lightly, but there are ways that we can do things collectively. And again, this is bigger than any one of us individually, but it's not bigger than any of us collectively. But collectively, we have to start burning our fuel better. And one of the techniques that I know of is by using hydrogen today to insert it into the air intake of anything that burns fuel that helps it to reduce this black carbon. Right now, we can reduce black carbon by 50%, but 50% is not good enough. 50% is a start, but it can help to slow down what the problems we have. Now, I don't know how on earth, gentleman Patan, I don't know how you got to share your screen, but I'm gonna see if I can share mine and to see if it will work. But
I
if it
lived the
does work,
last. I learned from the last experience. So I just sent mine to Sharif.
so that's it. So
That's how it worked.
so that's what now me and David have just learned. Okay,
Yeah.
because I didn't know how in the world you did that. But anyway, but the screen I would have shown is that most people have heard of CO2. Everybody knows about carbon dioxide, but most people don't know that black carbon is 1,500 times worse than CO2. And I didn't say 1 or 2 times worse. I said 1,500 times worse in this warming capacity. So we have to address black carbon. And then the book that, like I said, the book that I wrote, everything that's in there talks about the fact that our infrastructure exists. We're not going to get away from our infrastructure. Even if we want to go to green and electric cars and everything else, you got to use a fossil fuel infrastructure just to build it. And in the process, if you don't build it while addressing this black carbon, we're just exacerbating the problem. We're not going to, human beings are not going to stop growing. I mean, I live in Southern California, and literally every vacant piece of land that I pass is being built on. And I think the same thing is happening in North Carolina. The same thing is happening in all these other places. Literally. And all of that is diesel fuel. That is not electric cars building that stuff. That's not an electric infrastructure that's building it. It is a fossil fuel infrastructure. And it's a fossil fuel infrastructure that's not a bad word, because if it was, we wouldn't have any of the technology advances that we have today. None of them. None of it would exist. But so we appreciate the fact that we have technology. We can appreciate the fact that we have smartphones. We appreciate the fact that we have internet. We appreciate the fact that we have cryptocurrency. We can appreciate everything, but it's all based on the energy that we use that's based on fossil fuel. And that infrastructure is fossil fuel. It will always be fossil fuel, and we have to burn our fuel better.
Yeah.
We have to. Otherwise, we're in a we're charging our way to climate change and basically sea level rise, because 85% addition of black carbon on the Arctic ice in 4 years, that's going to continue. But we have a solution. The good news is we have a solution. But right now, the most important thing that I can say is that I want everybody in this panel and everybody on this podcast or this show to understand that black carbon is the enemy of the planet. It is the enemy of the planet. And until we do something about the enemy of the planet collectively, it will beat us. But we can beat it. But we can only beat it by us being collectively organizing and deciding and understanding that it is the enemy. Most people and most of the leaders in government, they don't even know about black carbon. And it's not because they don't want to know. It's just that they don't know. I didn't even know. In fact, I just found out about black carbon when I accidentally found out that our technology reduced a particulate matter emissions by 50%. And then I found out later, years later, that black carbon was a major component of particulate matter. So it turns out that our technology can reduce black carbon by 50%. Now, 50% is not 100%, but human beings are human beings. We can do anything. There is no limits to our capabilities when we have a target to shoot at. And that target needs to be black carbon. And everybody needs to understand it. All of our leaders need to understand it, because and in fact, I have a chapter in my book. It's called "Pissing in the Wind." Maybe sound graphic, but if we don't address black carbon any solution that we have for climate change will be pissing in the wind. And that's what we need to understand. So that's
Thank
basically
you.
my pitch that I want everybody to
Thank you.
understand.
There is two questions, one from Professor Edward and another from
Mhm.
Mr. Markley. First, Professor
Okay.
Edward.
Mine concerns pollution. I make the distinction between pollution that harms human beings and global warming, which I think is exaggerated. But what I wanted to know was about black carbon and its relationship to pollution. And by the way, I'll make two quick points here. The United States CO2 emissions in 2000 was 5.94 gigatons. Today it's 5.11. It's gone down by that much because we're using more natural gas rather than other sorts of things. The other point I'll make, since we're talking about Africa, if Africa today eliminated all fossil fuel use right now, today, this would only reduce the total CO2 emissions by about 2 to 2.5%, meaning it would barely be measurable. So if there's so Africans listening to this, worry about real pollution that harms human beings, for example, like mining cobalt in the Congo, which is a serious problem, versus the thing. But I'd like to know about the relationship between black carbon and pollution that harms human beings as opposed to warming. I think it's an important distinction to make.
And it is a very important distinction. But see, what most people don't realize also is that even natural gas, anything that burns fuel, produces black carbon. Mm-hmm. Black carbon is what black carbon is by definition is unburned fuel. And by definition, anything that we burn here on Earth is not completely burned. So black carbon gets into the atmosphere and it coats the glaciers. See, now again, I'm not talking so much about global warming and all this CO2 because I'm not really quite sure. I mean, I breathe out CO2. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm not quite sure, what my breathing is doing to harm the atmosphere because we all breathe it out. Okay, mm-hmm. But now at the same time, black carbon coats the glaciers, causes them to absorb light instead of reflect light, absorb heat instead of reflect heat, and they melt. Now, what happens is when we have melting glaciers is that we have climate changes. We have all of a sudden a cold spot or a cold area that's not a cold area anymore. It's warm. So you have changing weather patterns. Eventually, you can have changing currents that's flowing around the different oceans, and that will affect climate. That will affect all of us. And again, like you said, the mining issue that you just brought that is true, but they use diesel fuel.
Yes, I know.
Fuel.
We're not going to eliminate it. I agree.
Yeah, and we're not going to eliminate. We're not going to eliminate fuel. We have to have it. It's what makes human beings comfortable.
Agreed.
We are able to get on this call right now. I'm still sitting in my warm house, and it's cold outside. All right, and we're talking on the internet. I don't even know how much CO2 or black carbon is created because of electricity is going to these service stations. I mean, we create electricity, we use it, we need it, but even natural gas, and I want to tell y'all something, you're right. Natural gas is quote unquote cleaner in terms of CO2, but it still produces black carbon like crazy. And because it does, it gets in the atmosphere, it coats the glaciers, and it causes them to melt. And y'all need to understand, everybody needs to understand that melting glaciers is a problem. It is a problem. And carbon credits does not solve melting glaciers. People can get carbon neutral and carbon zero, but if it's still creating black carbon and it's melting the glaciers, none of that stuff matters. And that's what we all need to understand.
Yes. We have another question for you. Then we have to give chance to other speakers because we have 4 more speakers. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Markley, what's your short question?
Very short question. Not to play Chicken Little or anything, but I did have a guest on one of my podcasts that was saying, to Dan's point and everything, that if we don't deal with the melting glaciers, none of us may be around in 10 to 15 years. So I was just wondering, Dan, do you agree with that assessment? I mean, I've got a nephew that's, two nephews that are 12 and 13, and I hope that assessment is wrong. But he was saying that if we don't address it, that we could be facing the end of civilization.
I agree. And again, it's not going to be the end. We're going to always adapt. We're humans. We're going to adapt. But you're going to have situations where Florida is underwater. So you have people that got real estate in Florida, they're going to be water. So the melting glaciers is a problem. And again, it's something we have to look at. And again, nobody really knows what's going to happen in 10 to 15 years. Right. But at the rate that these glaciers are melting, and if the scientists are even close to being correct as to what happens if they're all gone, if it's all water, then we're looking at a totally different planet, and so water can be everywhere. And again, Miami right now, they are dealing with issues with climate change right now with the water that they're trying to pump out back into the ocean that's coming into the cities. So your point is very, very correct, Mark. And your nephews and nieces, whoever they were, the sons, they are right to be concerned. And I'm hoping that we get this message to them, because they're the ones that's going to start having all of the ideas and the great innovations and everything else that's going to help us beat this thing, because we got to beat it.
Thank you. Now I want to request Mr. Charis Asante.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful time just listening. I'm learning a lot here. So I am Charis. I'm a PhD researcher here at Syracuse University. So 10 a.m. here. And my research is at the intersection of entrepreneurship, design, and digital technologies. And so it's really interesting hearing all the comments that have come up here, the overlaps. And on top of all of that, I'm really happy to be here because I'm also a son of the continent. So I'm African, and I take this personally. And so I'll be sharing some thoughts on what we call ICTD, Information Communications Technology for Development. And I'm trying to situate Rwanda within that discourse and share a few ideas there, because this is, we could take a whole semester's course on this. So I just want to highlight 3 key ideas from research, about 30 years of research on ICTD, and how that might help us as we think about technologies and policy in particular. Let me just start the timer. I hope not to take too long. And so I think we're all aware of the statistics with Rwanda and technology. They've done a great job. And so I won't belabor us with that, but about 30 to 60% of the total population internet users, 75% mobile penetration rate. Nationwide digitization is sort of at the forefront of the development agenda. And we see that with the positioning, national strategy. But ICTD research tells us the statistics sometimes overshadow what the core reality is, especially if we're thinking about implemented technologies. And there's evidence across the world. We've mentioned South Korea. I studied and worked there in South Korea, and so I have firsthand experience of that, speaking with economists in there, giving us talks. And the approach that they took was long-term economic planning, and they emphasized digital infrastructure. So again, these are terms that have come up here, and I just wanted to echo that again. And so what I'm gonna do here is also bring up what ICT scholars call technocentrism. And technocentrism basically says that sometimes we think of these technologies as silver bullets, that they're going to be solving all the problems that we have. But not all the problems we have are technological problems. A lot of them are actually social problems and political problems and economic problems, and they're interconnected. And so over the years, we have come up with these principles that help policymakers and people interested in development efforts to think well about how to approach these solutions. And I'll highlight just 3 of them. So the first one that I want to talk about is this really interesting framework. Kentaro Toyoma is in Michigan State, and he talks about the theory of amplification. I think it's really key here. It's come up a bit in our discussions. But amplification theory basically says that when you introduce technologies into any system, it actually tends to amplify inequalities rather than mitigate for the lack of infrastructural competence. And so many of the ideas we're coming up with should account for differential situations and realities on the ground. So if you introduce a technology, the people that don't have tend to actually not have, even worse. The people that have tend to have more. And so we need to be aware of all of these because as we've said, technology is really a tool, right? It comes in and the people have to use it. But when you have a situation where certain people are disenfranchised and marginalized, the technology does not come to bridge that. It doesn't compensate for a lack of institutional efficiency. So that's the first thought principle that I think we should have. So whatever policy you're going to be implementing, you need to think about what the ground reality is, what inequalities exist, and how the technology might be amplifying that. The second principle I want to talk about is that of socio-technical concepts. It's really a perspective. Many of the technologies that we think about, we tend to think about them as in silos. But technologies are actually part of systems. So people call this systems theory or systems perspective or the socio-technical. It basically looks at a confluence, a system where the technology comes and has to be plugged into a culture, a society, an organization. And you need to account for what exists. Otherwise, the technology as a tool may come and then create what we now know as what unintended effects and so many complexities. And when we think about socio-technical systems, it also allows for us to account for generativity. I think a lot of the discourse around, oh, let's use technology for development is around generativity, because when technologies are utilized well, we see that human beings are able to use it to create unanticipated effects. So these are effects that we didn't even consider when we're designing technologies. And the ways that can happen is because they integrate well into a holistic view. This leads to the third point, which I think is about design. And I'm really passionate about this area. It hasn't come up as much, and so I just want to hammer away on this. Design is really, yes, the human capacity to create, but it looks at it's about holistic views, right? So we don't just design and create because we can, not just because we want to adapt, but because we want to have sustainable and progressive holistic systems. So design has to look at the entire thing, and I'll be sharing some of these references if you want to read more on it. And I'm drawing mainly from Nelson and Stolterman. They advance this view of design culture from their book, The Design Way. And I'll tie this later back into some of the suggestions for policy. But there's just so many failed projects in ICTD, government kiosks, way back from the early 2000s, telecenters, e-education projects, one laptop per child, so many of them that fail because they don't account for the larger system. Right? And so these are cautionary, more critical perspectives for us to consider when we're thinking about technologies. And with that first part sort of taken care of, I just wanted to highlight one socio-technical angle that we might take, particularly situating Rwanda. So I want to talk about natural language processing, NLP. So here in the information school where I study, we do a lot of research on so many different kinds of technology. So blockchain, AI is a big one. But NLP is also, I thought I'd talk about NLP because it's here, it's common, it's easily accessible, but it's so powerful as a market creating technology. That may be connected to what we have heard earlier about exponential technologies, and I'll talk about why. And so NLP really enables computers to understand and communicate using natural language. And so you've probably seen chatbots when you're trying to buy something online. And I just want to situate it as a potential means to closing the digital divide, something that we've heard before. Because Rwanda has a pretty relatively low digital literacy rate. About 10% of Rwandans are digitally literate, according to some of the reports that I read. And over 70% of the population speaks only Kenya-Rwanda, which is one language. And that's exclusion right there if we're thinking about the larger digital ecosystem. And so how might we plug them in to whatever emergent infrastructure that we've been talking about might look like? And I think NLP can play a role. Rwanda is not alone in this. because there's over 800 spoken languages in West Africa, and NLP has been being used to sort of bridge this gap. Again, going back to all that I've mentioned before, right? The principles, it's not a silver bullet. It needs to really integrate. Since my research also is in entrepreneurship, I want to highlight that informal work is a big part of how people make a living. Many people don't have their job description written down. Many people don't have government protection for welfare and so on and so forth. No consistent salary expectations. And so how do these two converge, and how might NLP play a role? NLP will allow researchers to create corpuses, right, between English, and we even heard a comment earlier about a video being only in French and then having to be translated for people speaking English to understand. So how might we bridge that? NLP will allow us to create corpuses, not just for Kenya, Rwanda, but other languages that may be marginalized. And then in doing that, we create an enabler for the ecosystem, a market creating technology, which is what I want to emphasize here. Many of the technologies that we should be looking at are those that should enable markets, exchange, within the freedoms that we've talked about, everything. And I agree with many of the things that have happened. So just to highlight some examples, InstaDeed 19, they created an NLP corpus for Pidgin English, right? And Pidgin is this really popular locally generated language in Western Africa, right? So instead of saying I go to school, you can say I go to school, right? So it's similar to English, but very different. And many people speak it without knowing how to speak English. And because we're able to create this Pidgin corpus, now there's BBC Pidgin English. And now all of a sudden, anyone and everyone that speaks Pidgin can access news from the BBC in a way that is personal to them, going back to this holistic idea. Digital Umuganda is actually in Rwanda, a voice chatbot. And so there are projects on this. Again, along the lines of the digital divide, I just want to highlight the fact that Rwanda also has a relatively small market. And so one of the problems, one of the ways that they've been trying to expand that is to reach out to international businesses and organizations. And so here I want to highlight how to engage the diaspora, because it's really key. I am here in the US, but look at this, my heart goes out for Africa. My heart goes back to home. And there are a lot of these market creating innovations that can connect the diaspora and the people on the ground in a way that supports everything that we've been talking about, to encourage entrepreneurs to innovate, right? Because nascent entrepreneurship, when people try to start businesses, it's easy. Yes, ease of doing business, relatively easy. You can start a company in a day. But one of the problems that have been highlighted in Rwanda, going back to a report from last year, research by Kentaro again, is that it's not starting the business that's a problem. It's actually keeping it running, right? Because they don't have access to funds. And this is where I think access to the diaspora will play a key role, because I'm here in the US, right? And then the exchange rates, the conversion, sending money back home, again, personal, sending money back home does a lot more for them than it would do for me. And all of a sudden, that capacity can revitalize the entrepreneurship ecosystem there. So 2 examples I want to highlight. One is Flurry. Flurry engages with the diaspora to actually provide health insurance for people on the grounds back in the African continent. And then the other example that I have is Simplify. They're actually doing this really innovative approach where rather than the person in the diaspora sending money, they can actually serve as the guarantor for a loan back in the continent, right? So again, empowering the people on the grounds to entrepreneur their way through. So those are the examples I wanted to give, one in natural language processing and then the other in fintech. And I just also wanted to, harp on some policy perspectives. We need to support existing companies to continue to grow. It's not just starting them. That's one of the problems that has been highlighted. And I don't think this is specific to Rwanda. I think this is pretty general. And so we need, because nascent entrepreneurship is difficult. You need to create legitimacy in a way that is very, very difficult. And I studied how people innovate and create something out of nothing. And it's a really interesting process, but nonetheless very difficult. The other thing would be about the education. I completely agree. One policy recommendation that came up in a report last year was to include more practical approaches in university education. Because even though these are the places where knowledge is being created, theory tends to just be theory. So how do we change theory into practice? Well, the students have to be engaged to with more practical approaches. So project-based learning approaches, which I've done a bit of work on back in Korea, will be super useful in that regard. Where as you're learning, you're actually creating a project, right? And that sort of challenges you to put your projects, your theories into practice. And the last thing I'll just highlight is about design and access to the diaspora, which I've talked about. And so I'll end it there, and happy to engage further because, again, I see this as part of a larger conversation. Africa is close to my heart and to the other fellows at Tando, where I represent. And I'm happy to have a conversation going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your excellent presentations. I will not take any question because of time issues. I directly want to give chance, Mr. Martley.
Oh, no problem at all. Glad that Mr. IG had a chance to bring up some very valid points. I thought it was a wonderful presentation that he gave and everything. So definitely glad to hear those comments. But a couple of things that were crossing my mind as I was listening to all of the speakers and everything that they were talking about. And one of them is actually goes to a question that was asked many ages ago by one of our listeners and everything. And that is the fact that while we want the countries, and we definitely need to understand that there are various countries within Africa, because I think sometimes we try to put all of Africa in one lump bag and all of that when we know that there are many countries there. It's not like that there is one uniform answer for the entire continent, because there are different parts of the country that are doing quite well and some that are not doing as well. So we need to find solutions based on what is going on in those individual countries, because like I said, they can be very vastly different. For example, Nigeria, and I do have some friends that are Nigerian, is doing actually quite well with internet use and all of that. I think that it's like 154.30 people in terms of millions that are actually having internet access. And then you go down to the next lowest one, which is surprisingly Egypt. 54.74 million have internet access there. And then Kenya, which is 46.74 million. And then you go further down to like South Africa and down to Rwanda, which is not doing as well, but they are working on efforts to improve that, and that is a wonderful thing. But even in those great countries that are doing well, like Kenya, it can still be an issue. I just had friends of mine that came back from a conference that Dr. Reuben West was putting together in Kenya, and they were having difficulties getting access to the internet, even in that country that is doing quite well, and therefore they were not able to do some of the things that they wanted to do, communicating back to the U.S. about what was going on in that conference. But I want to say it was in Nairobi, so even in that very populated city, there were still some internet access issues that are going on there that we may not be having in this particular country. So each country is vastly different, and we need to come up with vastly different solutions based on what the country is doing, and also their different government styles and their different government agencies. But one of the things, coming back to what I was going to bring up, was somebody had asked about technocracy, and we saw what happens with the big technological companies that have a vast amount of power and control and things of that nature. A lot of people think of like the big four, which of course include Amazon, Apple, Google, and I'm leaving out one of them right off the top of my head and everything. But we can also go and look at Tencent and Alibaba if we want to look at the ones over there from Asia and things along those lines. And there has been some vast concerns about the power that they have over the entire internet structure. I know that I've been part of a Black Business Expo, and Dr. Kelly, who is one of the founders, oftentimes talks about the amount of wealth that Jeff Bezos, and that might have been the one that I was forgetting, Amazon has versus the entire GNP of the African American population, and it uses that as a way to deal with the digital divide and to talk about that digital divide that exists and is a very real problem here in the country. Another thing that he talks about, which I know that Mr. Therese will be glad to know about, is the need for our people that are from here that are in the African American population to reach out to our brothers and sisters across the continent and to actually do work with them in terms of both building their infrastructure there, but also in terms of working on businesses that will benefit both parties. So they'll benefit both the African American population as well as those in the countries like Ghana, countries like Kenya, and those others. I do know that recently there have been entire efforts by some of those countries to even reach back over to the American side and to get people, particularly in the technological fields, to come over and to share their experience and possibly even to come over and take residence in those countries as well. Because I do know that that was a big push, particularly during the year of the return that Ghana launched. I think that was either a year or two ago that they did that, where they were trying to definitely reach out to more African Americans. And I understand that several people have taken that idea, including some very high profile people. I believe that Stevie Wonder is looking at making a return to the homelands as well. And there are others that are looking at that partially to bring their knowledge and partially because in some cases the land is not all that expensive in that area and everything. So there are definitely some efforts being made in that regards to get people into that area. And the other thing, like I said, I know that there's a lot of talk about trying to get people engaged in things like cryptocurrency and the metaverse. I'm actually friends with Mr. Youngblood, who is one of the founders, along with Nicole Maxwell, of what is called the it's one of the Black metaverses or one of the African American metaverses here and everything, but they have created that. He is actually here in North Carolina, in Raleigh, and I believe she is in Virginia. And we're seeing a lot of people that are developing their internet space and creating some very interesting dialogues and some interesting conversations in that regard. But I do know that a lot of people are very fearful of the power that big tech has in terms of not just its impact here in the United States, but also its impact globally. So that is one of the things that I think that we have to look at as a way that we can address the growth, but also not have them be overly dominant or be that kind of technocratic kind of dominance that I did hear that one of our listeners was afraid of, because I do think that that is a concern. And a lot of people, it really raised their eyebrows. I believe it was back in October when both Facebook and Instagram went down, and a lot of people were very much shocked by that. And it was a shock to their system because they had gotten so used to being able to just get on there and share their messages, whether that was positive messages or whether that was messages of family communications, or whether that was, as somebody mentioned earlier, things that they might have heard that might have been either real news or fake news. So that has been an issue that we saw. And actually, I just saw very recently, I want to say in the last day or two, that LinkedIn had had some similar issues where they were, and that is, of course, a tool that a lot of the professionals use, and they had been down for a while as well. I have not looked today to see if they're back up, but I did know that it definitely disrupted a lot of people's lifestyles because they were doing everything from these kind of feeds to a number of other feeds on LinkedIn. And of course, not having that distribution point, as a friend of mine calls it, was very much a shock to their system, and they were not able to deal with it as much as they would have liked to. But that's just some of the immediate thoughts that came to my mind as I was listening to the various presenters. And if anybody's got any questions based on some of the things that I brought up, I would love to hear them. And if I've got any response, I will definitely give those as well. But definitely, that's just some of the things that I think are very important for us to look into as well.
Thank you, Mr. Markley. Thank you. Now I want to give chance Mr. Dan.
Thank you, Sharif. Thanks, everyone. That's a great topic of technocracy versus democracy, because a democratic collection will not always come up with the most scientifically feasible solutions that keep the lifeboat from sinking. And Earth is increasingly becoming more like a lifeboat. Whether we like it or not, the pandemic era is here to stay, apparently. The carbon threat era is apparently here to stay. So I think one way to address this is, we've all heard of the digital divide, but I'd like to propose that there's something called the Dunbar divide, and that refers to Robin Dunbar's number, which was Robin Dunbar is a Oxford anthropologist that actually studied primates in Africa and noted a correlation between brain size and stable social relationships. So if you apply that number to humans, we're primates. Basically we're animals. We like to think of ourselves as separate from nature, but hey, you know what? The fossil record is got some other story to tell. Although it's not, that's a whole other debate there about the origin of humanity and life itself. But anyway, the number for humans is about 150 stable relationships, and it's interesting that this has been found to be maybe about the size of a good-sized tribe. And I think once you exceed that number, then you become an explorer. I think that's what caused the diaspora out of Africa, is that people basically got tired of their tribe and they said, I'm going to go see what's on the other side of the hill. And then we had civilization migrating out of Africa, out of the mother continent, and into the Indus Valley, into the Asia, all the regions. But that Africa is second largest continent on Earth, second biggest population on Earth. Amazing country, continent. Collection of countries there. So you really can't talk about the future of humanity and civilization without talking about the future of the mother continent. And I think, the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. This is cited often as an African proverb, and they tried to actually track down the origin of that proverb. And I think one of the closest translations was a Swahili proverb that says, what the mother does not teach the child, the world will. Kind of an interesting take on that. So, but I think Africa is going to teach our civilization, like a mother, how to avoid these existential challenges that are coming into play. And I think we're going to use all the great new technologies to recreate the Dunbar effect with and also bridge the digital divide. So there's a single bridge that's going to bridge the Dunbar divide and the digital divide. And I know we're running long here, so I really enjoyed this discussion, and I hope we can follow these threads in future shows. Thanks.
Thank you. This is really great discussions, and I believe that for our audience, this is very important. World Talent, I just want to share some views about World Talent Economy Forum, because we just finished our 430 episodes. Last 1 year, 6 months, we try to produce a lot of content. Yes, we have online, we have two initiatives because of the COVID-19 situations. We have two initiatives. One is World Talent Economy Forum, and another one is School of Talent Economy. Yes, by this time, we start to work with government. Last month, in October 25, we finished an open dialogue with Malaysian government climate change department, and Malaysian government promote our event in Dubai Expo. So I want to give thanks to all of our speakers for this achievement. Besides that, we starting this dialogue and this conference with Rwanda collated lab, and hopefully we can provide support to the African countries people. And we not only this kind of dialogues, we do more focus on policy research. We focused on different kind of project developments, as well as from our side, we will train next 1 year 1,200 entrepreneurs, 600 from Africa and 600 from Asia. So why we are doing this kind of thing? That is the question, because I'm also from a developing nations, and I find that knowledge is most important things. And we have a lot of barriers, especially we do not have a very good policy for our development. We do not have a better strategy for economic recovery in the COVID-19 situation. I know especially education is interrupted. Even in South Asia, I know $1 trillion lost only because of the COVID-19 situation and from the education system. And final things I just want to add, like example, world talent economy. Meritocracy is a very important for every nation, but somehow in the developing nations, we do not focus on meritocracy. We just focus on technology. We love to do discussion on investment. But who actually developed this technology, all of the talented people. We want to take a good model from Singapore, because Singapore is a very good model for development. They always focus on three areas. Number one, meritocracy. Number two, they try to reduce the corruptions. And number three, they have a better policy. So that's why we arranged this conference, Techno Policy, that if we can bring the if we can develop better policy for African nations. And final thing, I just want to add, we need support, because we will support provide training 1,200 entrepreneurs. World Talent Economy Forum more in action. So those who want to support our initiative, they can, as a academicians, as a trainer, as a researchers. Yes, we are starting our fundraising options, because we need to develop a digital lab, because we have to support more. Yes, if our capacity grow, we can support millions. This is not the story of 15 months from my personal life. Last 14 years, from the developing nations, we developed largest academy in Bangladesh is Cambrian Education Group. Another one is United Group. So from that experience, we know that if we can focus on the developing nations, we can get a very good result. So I request all of the developed nation people, you have to focus on developing nation country like these South American countries or African countries or Asian countries, because the more you focus, you get very good return. And second things, investment is always important. So that's why we focus on public-private partnership, because the more the developed nations go for investment in the developing nations, they will get good returns. Yes, every country has many challenges. I also know that there are a lot of challenges, but we have to work together, especially in the COVID-19 situation. What I understand that we have to work together. That's why we developed this World Talent Economy Forum. We get very good support from around the world. Yes, we have some point we have a lot of rejection, but we enjoy, because at the end of the day, we are contributing for the national development. So hopefully next 12 months for World Talent Economy Forum will be more interesting, because we are working and collaborating with more government and corporation and academy from the developing world. And hopefully your continuous support, especially our speakers, those who join in World Talent Economy Forum, your support will be very, very helpful for the developing worlds. So thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. Everyone get 1 minute for concluding remarks. First, I request Ashante.
Yeah, I just want to echo that it's been a great time listening and learning. I really appreciate all the comments that came from everyone else, and I look forward to engaging further. These training ideas sound awesome. I hope to be involved as feasibly as I could. And I'm also here representing Tando. I'm a fellow at Tando, and I know there's a lot of other fellows that'd be super interested. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Markey.
Great panel as always. You did another amazing job. I did just want to answer a question that one of your listeners asked, because they were asking about e-commerce and whether it had whether there were alternatives. And I don't think that e-commerce is going to go anywhere. I think that we're seeing even e-commerce being developed in the metaverse spaces, as well as some of those crypto spaces and with NFTs and a number of other ways that e-commerce is being developed. But I'm also a big fan of like the more traditional kind of shops, and not just retail shops, but also like farmers markets and things of that nature, which I know are very much prevalent in some of the African nations. And definitely, I think barter will also be used as well and will continue to be used. So I think that e-commerce isn't going anywhere, but I also think that our more traditional methods will still be out there also. So just wanted to answer Miss Ahmad's question, which were alternatives. And definitely, I do think that those more traditional ways are some of the alternatives, and metaverses and some of the newer ways are also alternatives as well. So just wanted to add that I was watching and did see that they had those comments. So I was giving an answer to them in my closing remarks. So definitely, but I thought it was a great conversation and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mr. David Chuankar. Can you unmute, please?
Mute.
Oh, sorry. little button double tap of the mute button. Anyway, I want to echo the comments about another great show, but I want to bring up one final closing point to think about, and that is tech is not a solution. Tech is a tool. Humans decide how to apply tools and where to apply them and why we apply them. So we can apply tools for a profit motive, and I'm all for that. I am entrepreneurial in nature, but we can also focus those strictly for betterment as well. And we can combine profit motive and betterment. And we can apply tools for things like fighting poverty or greater water distribution or whatever they want to be, but it's in the human's hands. It's not tech is the answer. And at the end of the day, we, the people, are the answer. And that's what I'll leave you with. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dan.
Yeah, again, I don't think that democracy and technocracy are at odds. I think we can basically make an open source kind of techno democracy, and we can keep the human future in human hands. And I think no one expresses that better than the platform of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Just a great document. I encourage everyone to seek it out online and check it out. I think permaculture is a wonderful design science that is gathering followers. It's not just about growing food. It's really a nature mimicking. It's a biomimicry kind of practice, and really can be applied to anything that you want to design in a regenerative, sustainable way. People may be wondering what the permatrail.org is. That's a vision I have for trails that go between all the permaculture designed installations on Earth. I think it's a great kind of goal to shoot for. There's thousands of them throughout the world. There's already thousands of miles of trails throughout the world. If we just extended these trails and kind of biased them toward permaculture places, we could actually have a worldwide freedom to roam kind of human right, which they have in a lot of countries. Scandinavia has a freedom to roam kind of ethic. So I'm thinking this could be done by a landmark date, December 10th, 2048, which will be the 100th anniversary of the great document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I think can now be upgraded to be called Humane Rights, as we start to incorporate sentient beings that aren't necessarily human, which are definitely on the radar. And I'm just a lifelong fan of Buckminster Fuller. He said it's possible for us all to live without taking advantage or expense of each other. He called it omni-advantaging, and Bucky Fuller and Art Clark are two of the big reasons I'm a transhumanist advocate. So thank you again, and live long and prosper, and please keep up the good work. Thanks for the opportunity here.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Dom.
Yes, I just have one statement to make, and that I want to ring in everybody's ears, and that is black carbon is the enemy of the planet. It is the enemy of the planet. And everybody needs to understand it, and I hope everybody gets to learn more about it, because we still only have one planet Earth. And I don't care how advanced we get to be, I still like butterflies and caterpillars and porpoises, and we're not going to have that if we don't do something about our planet, making sure that this black carbon threat does not continue.
Thank you. Mr. Edward.
Yeah. I'll echo the praise for Sharif for putting on this excellent event. And of course, I will echo the idea that technology is a tool, but you need human beings to employ those tools. I'll just reiterate the point I made at the beginning. In 1990, I did a report, Why Asia Grows and Africa Doesn't, where I looked at places like Singapore and said, why is Singapore doing so well, and South Korea and Taiwan and South Korea and so forth? And it was because they allowed their entrepreneurs to create, to innovate, to try different things and so forth. That same year, 1990, I visited Tanzania and Kenya. By the way, I got this very nice sculpture from a Tanzanian group that were working with young people and women to help create more entrepreneurs and more opportunities. It's a very nice sculpture. But again, I want to emphasize the importance of allowing individuals to be innovative, allowing them the liberty to do this, and allowing them to echo some of the other points that were made here, to try to do it locally where possible, because Africa is a very vast, varied country or continent. So you have to allow for the maximum use that what works in Johannesburg might not work in rural Nigeria, which might not work in some other place. Allow innovation, allow individuals to innovate, because we know that when individuals have liberty to do so, and where you have good governments like in Singapore and places like that, countries flourish, countries prosper. And Africa, the Africans are the wave of the future, and as is Asia and other parts of the world. So we want to help as much as possible, and we have an optimistic future. Be optimistic if you're listening to me. Don't worry about the pessimism. Be optimists.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Especially I request our audience, please share our content with your government, with your corporations, and with your academy, because World Talent Economy Forum working on that particular area. Beside that, I want to give a special thanks to Collated Lab, because they are collaborating with us, Mr. James, Diana. They are actually helping all us, the World Talent Economy Forum. Beside that, in the back end, we always get support from Humaira Tanzila, Shohel Rana, Debashish, Adam. I think he has a meeting, so he left early. So we have a strong team in the back end, and they always support World Talent Economy Forum. I want to give them special thanks, and I want to give them thanks to Colette Lab and the audience, those who are observing World Talent Economy Forum. If you need any kind of like support from World Talent Economy Forum, especially research, coaching, and consulting, we are happy to do that. And I want to invite all of our speakers to join in our core team, because next 1 year, I can promise you, it will be more exciting. We are reaching millions of people in the developing world, and the developing world start to believe that, and their government start to believe that World Talent Economy Forum, how they are taking action, not only the dialogue, not only taking class, they are developing projects and try to help them economical sustainability, which is very, very important for them. And your contribution will be very effective for the developing world. Yes, we are advocate for modern science, engineering, and technology, but yes, we focus on developing world. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you everyone for excellent contribution for this conference. Bye-bye and take care.
Take it easy.